Today, we'll talk about advanced level trading setups. I'll show you multiple inducements and rally starting strategies such as Super BPR. Then I'll explain how you can look for sniper scalping trades for high profits like a pro trader. For multiple assets such as Bitcoin and Nasdaq. We have so much to cover. If you're ready, let's start. Welcome our free trading course, all about price action trading strategies and smart money concepts. Today we'll talk about advanced level trading. If you are looking for a structured table of contents, I set it up for you. You can find it on Google Drive or directly from my website, which is in the description. Before we start, let's talk about what Super BPR was. If you do not remember, it was a very simple concept of a minimum of 3 imbalances colliding with each other. Of course, life is not this simple when it comes to trading. We need multiple levels of confirmations before entering a trade. Remember, BPR is everywhere you can look. You must use it in a big context. Let's get back to this 1 hour chart. What do I see when I look at this chart? First thing that I notice, these 3 points of open liquidity areas, and each has compressed liquidity just below them, making a very attractive area to pull the price. And these triple lows below the major area that swept previously. What does it indicate to me? Price grabbed an intense amount of liquidity and trying to do something. After all, price swaps liquidity for a reason, mostly pushing the price to some destination. Now I will focus on this final area close by and talk about the price action happening inside. You can notice this tiny equal low area that might pull the price. However, remember, the most attractive liquidity is above. Right at this point, something happens. Price sweeps another tiny equal low and intensely move up, creating this shift in structure with a very powerful break. Right at this point, you can witness the Super BPR, and if you closely check it out, it is filled to the tick perfection. So market structure siding with me, plus I have the Super BPR. If we just zoom out a bit, you can also notice that we are in extremely reactive area. Each time price comes here, price is being pushed. Notice how the price is rejecting this area one after another. So all the stars aligned for me to enter a trade in this area. Now let's switch to the 5-minute chart and keep digging more and more. The date is 29th of September. We are around the 9:30 a.m. New York opening, the last day of the week, Friday. I know that from higher time frames we have intense fuel and solid direction for top side, so I am bullish. Right before the New York Open, something else happens. Notice this equal lows. Price creates extra fuel here as an inducement. What is an inducement? Gas stations, fuel points that price take a detour before reaching the main destination. So here, price is not going down like a downtrend. Price only makes a temporary reverse to Super BPR with this inducement and grabs more fuel to reach its destination. So, Super BPR to the tick clears inducement and reactive flip area. I make my market entry. I do not have time to think about limit orders here, a quick price action. As a normal trade, I would want an instant hit to my targets above. But my trade was stuck on the weekend with this hideously low volume. But I trust my setup. This is why I never closed it over the weekend and I kept it. Let's take a closer look at the area. Can you have a proper entry here? Of course, notice how the structure shifts right here. with this inner market structure break after the 9:30 a.m. New York Open. That is your true entry. I only used my own experience to enter early. As for targeting, we already pointed out the most significant liquidity points above. I personally always try to take profits along the road and leave some for the runners. Why do I do it? Because I don't want my efforts go to waste. Remember, price can turn back from any point at any time with any news. Let's see a more compact trade that I've taken last week. Notice this daily BPR area. High time frame BPR areas are highly reactive. But more importantly, notice this swing failure pattern right here. Remember this very well and take note. Liquidity is the king of trading. Nothing even close to liquidity. All charts driven by liquidity, not structures. So whenever you look at the charts, you must first look for liquidity, then imbalances, and then structures. Of course, you can combine three of them if you want. Now, let's take a closer look at the area with the 5-minute time frame. Again, we will work on the New York Open. Why? Because it is when all the assets become volatile, and we need volatility. Moving prices to make entries, we need that high volume. Remember my previous trade stuck on weekend with no volume at all. Low volume is not good for trading. Now, this is a special price point to focus on. Previous week high and also previous day high at the same time. With the New York Open, price makes one more push afterward and intentionally drops with a strong movement. But before that, let's focus on the possible inner targets. These equal lows, sweet for taking profits, which combined with imbalance. But this parabolic liquidity is also special because it carries the Asia and London session low points, giving us a higher level of liquidity areas to target. Let's drop to 1-minute time frame and dig more. Let's work on the chart even more now. Notice this extremely powerful market structure shift right at this point, and this tiny imbalance with the order block attached to it. Remember, combining order blocks with imbalances will give you much better performance. But I want you to notice this. Equal highs magically appears here. Price sweeps the area, filling the imbalance and the order block. Again, this is what inducement is. One more time. What is inducement again? Momentary reversal points on the price to grab extra fuel before reaching the final direction. Simple as it gets. This was another market sell order for me. Last week, I mostly managed my trades fully manually because of heavy economic data news. I wanted to be in control of the price most of the time. If we zoom out to see take profit points, Asia and London lows with equal area are great areas to take profits. For a final runner, you can keep some for filling this large imbalance, but this is a far away target because price can easily reverse along the way. Who knows? Best to keep trades as short as possible and leave small amounts for the runners. Before ending today's video, I want to talk about this Nasdaq example. The problem is trading a single asset like Bitcoin. You will never be able to find clear setups every single day as a day trader. So you need an arsenal of assets to trade. For example, total of 4 or 5 assets in your portfolio would be great. Bitcoin and Ethereum, S&P 500 and Nasdaq futures or options, couple of Forex pairs. You can also trade gold and oil futures if you are into them. Let's get back to this example. Extremely simple idea here. Right before the New York opening, price sweeps this area. Personally, I hate these tiny sweeps. I never call them proper. However, as you noticed, price also cleared Asia and London highs and all the parabolic movement before the drop. These are great indications. You can also notice the structural shift after the sweep and the order block with imbalance. Now, what do you see here? Extremely simple trading setup with high clarity. Sometimes I'm also guilty of over-analysis and missing very simple trade ideas like this one. So your takeaway is easy trades will be generally the most clear setups you can find. Okay folks, ending this great lecture, learned about superior level trading concepts. Probably next week we will look into more trading examples. I hope you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you, please take care and see you soon.